Listen, we also got a couple of hot takes when the original news broke about MLS pulling out of the U.S. Open Cup. We had a couple of mean comments about that too. Now we've gotten back 16 of the teams. I believe it's 16. And they all entered at the round of 32. And what was cool was that they set it up intentionally to ensure MLS versus USL matchups, making the first 16 games between the leagues, which is great because you hate watching, USL versus USL knock each other out, and then it's always MLS at the end, right? You want to see those teams go up against MLS teams, right? Well, that didn't go so hot because in those 16 games, USL only won a single game against a 10-man New York. Have I mentioned that it was New York City who lost that game? I feel like we should really, really emphasize that. New
Sorry,
York
I
City
missed that.
lost.
What team was it again?
Yeah,
I
yeah,
missed that. You
yeah. The
cut out.
baseball team, Man City Light, they're out, right? Which is just so
Uh,
sad, so sad.
they can
Um,
wipe their tears with their small banner.
yeah, nice. But here's the thing, like these results have sparked that usual conversation online about MLS versus USL and how quickly the gap's going to close and pro rel and all this sort of stuff. And it's like there's just a lot of conversation about it. So I want to get your thoughts on the tell of the results and if they tell you anything about USL versus MLS, you personally, as a Euro snob, of course.
My instant reaction was like, I think I fell for the like kind of instant reaction of, well, clearly this just shows that the gap is massive and Pro Rel was going to be a disaster of a situation if you tried to combine the two leagues and force that into existence. But I was kind of like reading some other people talking about it, and I think I kind of came to the conclusion of like, it's not necessarily showing us that there's this gap. I think people knew that this gap existed. I almost feel like the results from last year maybe started to shift. I mean, not drastically in any regard, but maybe shift the conversation a little bit towards, okay, maybe the gap is closing down. Now I feel like we just went back to where we were before, where clearly this is a massive gap between the two leagues. We'll see what Division One status does for USL if they're able to kind of like start to build things back up and close that gap. But as of right now, it seems to be that there is still a significant gap between the teams. Pro Rel is just not going to be an option at the moment between the two leagues. I think it's good within the USL universe to like implement it. I think it's a good way to test it out and see if it could be successful in the US. But in terms of combining USL and MLS, it's not going to work. I think it clearly just shows that MLS still has way more power and money right now and is able to kind of flex that with wins like this in the US Open Cup, where I think from what it sounded like, there was a lot of rotation in the teams as well, and still winning like 15 out of 16. So, not a great sign for those who want to close that gap.
He's still a Euro snob, but he knows how to cut through every single question I was going to ask in literally 30 seconds. So not much has
You might
really
as well,
changed, has it?
honestly, you might as well just ask all the questions at the start, and then I'll just give you my answer. We could
Oh,
fire through this
man.
episode in 15 minutes.
Well, listen, I don't usually take much from these one-off tournament games, right? I mean, listen, a seventh place New York Red Bull team was one goal away from being crowned the best team in MLS last year. Like anything can actually happen in these sort of like playoff sort of scenarios, right? But the comment that I kept seeing and one that you brought up was like USL getting blown out by MLS reserve side, right? So I did a little digging on that. And I'm not sure I necessarily agree with that take, right? Four of the 16 games went into extra time or penalties. Seven of the remaining 12 were one goal or less, including Pittsburgh 1-0 win over New York City. Did I mention that it was New York City who lost? They were the only MLS team to lose, by the way. I don't know if we've hit on that, but just to make sure people know that. You can argue that teams rotated a little bit, but at the very least, you saw three or four of the usual starters per team, and there are teams like Red Bull who had 10 of their 11 players had at least one MLS start because they do a lot of rotation in general, right? Trying to figure out what works. Am I going to take anything about MLS from USL from this? Uh, I mean, I can hear the argument that you have a pretty decent gap in general between USL starters and MLS bench players, considering that most USL teams, their starters are former MLS bench players. Like if you look out some of the teams, and I remember we used to do that, like when we were talking about US Open Cup in the past, it was like, oh, I didn't know that's where he ended up, right? Like I think Justin Dillon, who is like a big Seattle prospect at one point, ended up playing for Colorado that the Red Bull played, and he looked okay, but that gap is still there. There's a reason he's there and not on the MLS first name off the bench type of thing, right? I don't know if that gap is as big as people think it is. I think it's closer. I think it's not as big as the people who are trying to make it sound big is, but it's also not as close as the people who are like, no, they're right there. I think it's somewhere in the middle, right? And that's something I think we just need to accept is the fact that online you are going to blow it out of proportion in both directions, right? It's going to, there are people out there gonna be like, oh my God, the gap is from here to the, like USL to MLS is basically like, Division 7 in England to the Premier League. Like, no. But it's also not saying that USL is, you could put USL teams in MLS right now and they'd finish in the top four of any conference. I don't think that's true either, right? And because of those big overarching generalizations, some users on these interweb website things, they were making these comments that people should stop making comparisons like that for using the US Open Cup as an example, right? So I was in a conversation with this guy who made this tweet along the lines of like, MLS fan bases say that US Open Cup doesn't matter when USL wins, but when they win, it's all about how USL is bad and the gap is huge and they're so predictable. And I basically went back and I was like, listen, I agree that the one-off tournament doesn't tell you if a team is good or bad. But we can't just pretend that USL fans weren't out here screaming about how close the gap was last year when USL did really well, right? It happens all the time, and that's kind of what this is about. And they also use that USL strength in later rounds to talk about Pro Rel and how they could put Pro Rel in right now and they'd compete. So I want to get your thoughts on that, and should we have this idea of like, let's not use US Open Cup online to talk about league strength?
I would disagree with that. I mean, I understand that like why people use it as like the debate point because it's like, what else are you going to use to like? I'm not saying that this is necessarily like the best way to make the comparison, but like, what else are you going to use to compare the two leagues? This is the closest thing you have in terms of teams kind of going head to head. Obviously, like, there's a lot of debate about who how like full strength teams are going, like how much effort they're going to be giving on the field, but there's not like another comparison that you could really make. There's not like other competitions where you're seeing them go head to head. This is kind of it. This is like, so I understand why people go to this to like make their comparisons of, how big is the gap between the leagues. But I would say I definitely agree with your point. I mean, despite what I said before about like all this stuff, I think I would agree with you in saying that like, these however like fluctuating performances are with USL and MLS in the US Open Cup really shouldn't be like a huge determining factor in like how far apart these leagues are in terms of quality and valuation and like talent and all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, listen, for me, at the end of the day, I want this conversation to happen because that's what this is about. As you mentioned, there is no other way to compare the two. And when you have two different fan bases not communicating to each other, you don't have those stories, you don't have those discussions, you don't have that buzz that, is generated with games like this, right? For those of you who don't know, if we haven't mentioned it enough already, there's no promotion and relegation between the USL and MLS, right? Therefore, this is the only chance we get to see them play. This is the debate that we have about quality on the field, gameplay, right? The other conversations that we have are MLS has more money or USL has more connected fan bases. Like that does I don't care about like I care about it, but I don't care about it when it comes to the game. I want to know who plays the game well, right? So I say let the league versus league debate rage on because at the end of the day, that's what USOC is there to do. It's to give us more storylines and to bring more conversation to the game between the fans, right? I think that what's great about the cup is that it gives us more than just regular seasons and playoffs to chat about, right? Regular season in sports of all types can be boring, right? I mean, NBA, MLB, those games are dreadful sometimes, right? MLS can get dry in the middle of the year. Leagues Cup has replaced that a little bit, but it can get dry in the middle of the year. So can USL. So can the Premier League. I've tuned out of the Premier League for the last like 3 months because Everton's season was basically done, and I had no
Yeah,
desire
I
to
mean,
watch any other
almost
team.
everybody's season was done.
Well, I know, but and that's what I mean. Like it does get boring at some point. So now we have this other tournament, which is why we wanted them to go back in the first place, so we could have these storylines. You know, we let's have this conversation. Let's utilize it because at the end of the day, the alternative online would then be the conversation of nobody cares about the U.S. Open Cup, and here are the attendance numbers to prove it. Right? I would rather talk about the results on the field and them being miles away or inches away versus attendance numbers. You know how boring that stuff is? being online, I'm like, oh my god, and we've done that too, and it wasn't the greatest content, but we've had that conversation, and we could too, right? The attendance numbers again weren't great last year, or this past week, because and regardless of where you were, whether you were at an MLS stadium or a USL stadium, but instead of having that conversation, we can talk about the games, and that's what it's about.
No, I completely agree with you. I mean, like you said, maybe the only exception to this would be the NFL season, just considering how short it is. But I feel like every other league in American sports or like other soccer leagues around the world completely agree they will hit dull points in a year where it's just like repetitive. Guys are kind of like just kind of in their groove, not necessarily like important games. It's like if we lose this one, it's whatever. We got another game in like 2 days. Like we play 82 games in a season. Like if we lose one, it's not a big deal. It's not the end of the world. But then it's like now you throw in the tournament factor in, and it's like okay, if you care enough, like these are games that you have to win. There is no oh we'll have another game in like 2 days. No, it's like you win and you keep playing, or you lose and you're done. So it's like it's nice to kind of get that mix in there to keep things a little bit lively. So it's not just like, run in the mill, like we're just showing up, collect our check, kick the ball around for a while. Not to say that they're not trying, but it's just like, it gets repetitive. It gets a little bit dull, like you said.
No, like I said, I think we're on the same page there. And again, at the end of the day, right, you're always going to have, especially in football, you're always going to have the Premier League versus La Liga, right? You're going to have the Bundesliga versus Liga, whatever it may be. You're always going to have that conversation of which is more enjoyable. It can happen here too, right? But I do think that there's also this idea of like damage control online now, right? The takes are so big because they're trying they spent so long, and I'm using they as USL right now, but MLS did it the year before too, where when you lose, it's instantly like, oh, don't worry about it. Like it doesn't even mean anything at the end of the day, right? Last year, MLS fans used oh, the cup doesn't even matter, nobody cares about it. Like this is just a training exercise. Like you had those. I imagine it like that crying face behind the smiling mask meme, like a very much those sorts of takes, right? And this year it's USL's turn to put that on, saying, once Pro Rel gets here, that gap it's already closed, but it's going to be non-existent once Pro Rel gets here. And I don't think you were around for any of our USL Pro Rel thoughts. So since you are a newly minted Euro snob, and this is kind of your vibe, let's get your takes. Do you think Pro Rel is going to? And you kind of were hinting at it already, but go a little bit deeper into the idea of, do you think Pro Rel closes that gap?
I don't. I will try not to go too far into a tangent on this whole thing, but I personally am of the belief that I think people want to see talent on the field and mainly through marketed stars. I think at least in the US. I think over in Europe it's kind of a different story. Obviously there's so much longer history, especially in this sport in particular. So it's a lot more built up tradition and like generations of fandom. So it's a bit different. But I think in the US, I think what stuff that makes the NFL and the NBA so popular is just because they market their stars so well. And it's like in terms of their sports, it's you're watching the best people play. So I think Pro Rel isn't going to get you that. Pro Rel gets you more towards the European style, which I just personally don't think is what people want to see here in the US. I think they want to see models more similar to like other American sports where it's like, we want to see the stars play. I mean, look at Messi. Messi came in, that's the star. And what happened? Like the attendance numbers and the ticket prices and everything shot up because people want to see Messi. They want to see the stars. I don't think the general American fan cares about if there's promotion relegation in the league. So I quite frankly don't think it closes the gap. I think MLS has way too big of a head start and way too much of a foothold in the space in the US for USL to really be able to make up ground. I just personally I don't want to make USL fans upset, but I personally just don't think USL will be able to catch up to MLS unless MLS does something to shoot themselves in the foot.
Man, you talked about like that history and that fan base in Europe, like you have experience. Like, were you just in Europe by chance? Did you happen to be
Well,
there?
I've got generations of Europe fandom over there. I went and visited the family. We got family season tickets with our names engraved in the stadium seats. So
I'm just surprised you haven't talked about how it's just changed your life. I mean, you're not like other girls, but like it just changed your life, I'm sure.
I mean, I think it just kind of comes through in my personality. I don't think I need to necessarily say it. Like, I mean, it's like you ever seen the meme where it's like, I won't say when I'm rich, but there will be signs.
Yes.
That's me. I won't say when I'm a Euro snob, but there will be
Yeah.
signs.
Yeah. I'm not gonna publicize when I'm rich, but there will be signs and it's gonna be this wall just all over the place.
Oh my God. You're gonna have a whole museum of scarves if you get
I'm gonna
rich.
have I'm gonna have a house just for scarves.
Oh, it's gonna be
Um
so bad.
yeah, don't ever let me get money, people. Do not subscribe to this show, do not listen to this show, do not give me money. Bad things will happen. Um
I agree with that.
No, I agree with, and I agree with you. Look at that. We're so nice. No, this doesn't instantly close the gap. I don't even think it closes the gap in like 5 years, right? Because the statement assumes that MLS will be stagnant in those 5 years of USL growth. I'm not saying USL won't grow because you're gonna find people who really latch onto that stuff and will be a part of it, and that's great. That's awesome. No problems with that at all. But then you're just assuming MLS is going to be where it is right now. And that just won't happen. You are not going to let these people sit there and say, yeah, let these other guys catch up. They're going to do everything they can to separate themselves, right? So, and we've talked about this stuff at length, right? The money makes sense. You mentioned that, and the quality of play follows money, right? There's a reason that people think the Premier League is the best in the world, even though it may not be. It's because it has the most money. There's a reason why the top five teams in or the top five leagues are viewed as the best because they have the most money, right? It's not a shock. And then there's the conversation of history behind that, which is a whole different things. So, all that being said, I don't want to dive into this. We've talked about the spending of teams all the time. That's something we talk about all the time. But the level of investment that is needed into USL to make it even come close to MLS at this moment is just unreasonable at best. Combine that with the fact that MLS is going to continue to take steps forward. It just isn't going to catch it that fast. You want to talk about in 20, 30 years? Sure, maybe, right? I can't predict that far out. But the gap on the field can be argued whether it's close or far, but I don't think in terms of money spending and overall reach at the moment, it's anywhere close. So you're going to need a lot of time to close that gap. It's not going to happen overnight. So I agree with you.
Yeah, I mean, you look at a guy like Antoine Griezmann, right? Like he's been rumored to come to the States for a long, long time. I don't think he's all of a sudden considering USL just because they've implemented Pro Rel. I think the guy, if he's coming to the States, he's coming to MLS 99.9% sure. Just because that's probably what he knows. I mean, like, say what you want about the reputation of the league overseas, but like people know MLS exists. I don't think most Europeans know what USL is at all. And I don't think that's going to change just because they bring in Pro Rel.
What is the name of the second division in Iceland?
Couldn't tell you.
Exactly. But do you know that they can get promoted into the first division of Iceland? What's the name of the first division in Iceland? Couldn't tell you.
Like the Iceland Premier League, I don't
Yeah, maybe,
know.
right? But that's the point, right? Is the idea that Pro Rel is the magic bullet that's just going to make everybody care is short-sighted, right? But I think this is a
And
really
this
oh god.
sorry. I was gonna say, it's been a lot of like kind of dunking on USL's ability to catch up to MLS. I don't want it to just be like us dunking on USL the entire time. Like, I think the league serves a really good purpose for, the US is so large, it kind of fills the gaps of hitting markets that aren't picked up by MLS, and I think that's great. And it's awesome to see like a lot of really cool, like tight knit communities come together and support these teams. I mean, there's even a team that's popping up like relatively close to where I am in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
So, like, that's awesome. I think that's great. Like, I think I really like want them to like continue to exist and still be able to perform. I don't want them to like get swallowed up and just completely fold as a league. Like, I think there's absolutely a purpose for it, even if it's not necessarily reaching the levels of MLS.
Yeah. No, I think that's spot on. We talk about that a lot as well, so we won't dive into that, but I do